Well, I'm here at Richborough Power Station, or rather what was Richborough Power Station, because I feel like this is the closest point to me that's pertinent towards the energy crisis that we're in throughout Europe at the moment. Over there, until about 10 years ago, was a power station. Now, admittedly, it had been abandoned and mismanaged and running on oil from Venezuela for a few years, but it was built by the Central Electricity Generation Board to burn coal from the local Kent coalfields situated down the road. And it's provided power produced locally from local coal through what is essentially was a state-owned enterprise, and transmitted it through the grid to businesses, homes, etc. in the Kent area. Now, the site is still active and it's used for two things these days. One is a shore point for energy coming from wind farms, the Thanet Array, and it's also used as a converter station for a high voltage DC power cable importing power from Europe over there, from Belgium. And in fact, the power connections to the grid have been upgraded. There's a new transmission line from here to Canterbury, and it enables 1 gigawatt of power to be imported from the European grid in Belgium to the UK grid, which then goes to anywhere it's needed in the UK. Now, these interconnectors are actually very common. There's one in Folkestone, there's one very near Folkestone in Sellinge, there's one over there in Grain, one down near Portsmouth, and there are others around the country, and we have flows in from Europe, and we have flows out towards Ireland, etc., etc. So the UK grid, the electricity grid, is interconnected with the European grid. I'm here on top of the high voltage DC cable connecting Belgium, which is over there, to Richborough Power Station, which is over there, and beneath my feet are cables that carry 1 gigawatt of power when running at maximum power, of power either from the UK grid to the European grid, or from the European grid to the UK grid. Now, as I've said, there are many of these interconnectors, but there's one interconnector that's been very important, and it's just down the road at Sellinge. And this is a 2 gigawatt connector, and it's been in place since, well, in some form since the 1960s, but in its current form since the 1980s. And since that connector was installed, it has run essentially flat out at 2 gigawatt, giving cheap French nuclear power access to the UK market. And most of the time, 2 gigawatts of power has flown from the European French grid to the UK grid. But at the end of last year, 2021, something happened in the French grid. And that was that in France, they have a lot of nuclear power stations, and they're run to a very high level of safety. But a safety check was carried out, and it was found that some welding was not up to standard in one of the safety systems, and so some French power stations had to be shut down. This meant that the French electricity network was not generating as much power as normal. Now, France doesn't just export to the UK, it exports to other neighbouring countries. And so the whole European energy network had less spare power available to it. Now, situations like this are accounted for by using gas turbines. Gas power generation of electricity is a great way of creating backup electricity. Now, it's good because it's clean and it's available very quickly. And also the stations are fairly cheap compared to at least nuclear, say, or wind, very cheap to build. So the UK lost 2 gigawatt of power from France. And this was actually combined with a fire in the converter station over at Sellinge. What this meant was that there was suddenly more reliance on gas to produce that missing electricity from the French nuclear power stations. And the price of gas, towards the end of last year, went up. Over there is Ramsgate Port, and Ramsgate Port is one of many ports in the world where wind turbines are serviced from. And just past Ramsgate is the Kent Array, one of the first large-scale offshore wind farms. Now, in the UK, we are transitioning towards green energy, but we're not quite there just yet. And we're unfortunately in the situation where a lot of coal and oil and nuclear power stations have or will shortly be shut down. Towards the end of 2021, those safety checks were carried out in the French nuclear power stations and they were shut down. This meant that the UK and other countries in Europe were more reliant on gas electricity generation, and the wholesale price of gas in Europe went up. Now, it's not just interconnectors like the ones here which carry electricity. There are interconnectors all across Europe that carry gas. And what this means is that there's essentially an open market, that if gas is produced in one country in Europe, it can be transported to another. And essentially this means that the cost of gas in one country is roughly the same as in the other. So the price of gas goes up in 2021. Now, the largest producer of gas is Russia. And they have all their pipelines directed towards Europe. And this is very important to understand, that suddenly, at the end of 2021, there's a huge amount of money in selling gas, and there's a huge amount of demand to buy that gas. Not quite as high as it could have been if we'd had a really cold winter, but still very high. And this sends gas prices shooting up, and it sends a huge amount of money into the coffers of the Russian government. Now, it's my opinion that this extra money that is given to Russia essentially has caused the war in Ukraine, because Russia knows that at the moment Europe is extremely reliant on their gas, that they have a bargaining chip. So at the moment your gas price is going even higher because Russia is trying to turn down the gas to Europe. They've basically, well, Nord Stream 2 has been cancelled and Nord Stream 1 is almost offline as we speak. Now, gas can be stored, unlike electricity, and there is very little storage going on at the moment because all the gas that is being imported into Europe is being burnt to produce electricity because of those French nuclear power stations that are still offline. Now, you might think that the energy companies are being very greedy, and indeed they probably are, but there is a real shortage of gas. There is not enough gas to go around, and it has to be limited one way or another. And the way it's being done at the moment is by putting up prices. If you increase the price, people won't buy as much. So it's not a political video, and none of my videos really are. I'm just stating the facts of the situation. I don't really have a solution to the energy crisis. I would suggest that things could be done to help, such as keeping nuclear power stations open longer, getting more gas out of the ground with techniques such as fracking, and also massively reducing our energy consumption. But there is not a case to be made, unfortunately, and it pains me to say this as someone who lives in a house that needs a lot of gas. There is not a solution to simply help people out to buy gas, because there's just not enough gas to go around. And that's at the moment. Come winter, there'll be even less to go around. I do believe this is a short-term thing, and if the gas price goes down as well as the oil price going down, then Russia's money that's coming in from gas and oil sales, which makes up the vast majority of their income, will plummet and they'll be on the back foot. But at the moment we're in an extremely difficult situation, and it's one that is not quite as simple as people make out, because I think it's often said that the war in Ukraine is forcing energy prices up. This started before then. It started with coal and nuclear and oil fired power stations being shut down, and it started because they're obsolete, and it was exacerbated by French nuclear power being limited. And the situation is getting worse as we speak, because French nuclear power stations are having to be shut down because the cooling systems simply have no water because the rivers have dried up. So this is a situation from here in Kent, and I hope that explains things a little bit.